cases. And then I want to try to talk to you about your resume, which is a very important document. We'll talk a little bit about document design and how that'll work in terms of making your resume more attractive. I had a wonderful experience a while back. I showed my resume to someone fairly high up here at the university, and she took one look at it and she said, "Oh, wow." Now that's the kind of response you really want to get to your resume. And that's what we'll try to do here. We'll try to have your resumes looking like really classy documents that'll get people's attention. So we will get logged in. And my hope is to be able to give you back the first assignment in class next week. Okay? It's an easy thing for me to grade because I know just what I'm looking for, and it's not that difficult. The assignments get more complicated. As we go through the semester, you'll see that I'm going to be asking more of you. Excellent. Here we go. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about the printing press and how we got to where we are in terms of printing stuff. Because you need to see that this is something that goes back a long ways. And there are various arguments over which came first, writing or mathematics. My own feeling is that it was probably, I'm of the opinion that it all started out with the mathematics first. I think the mathematics had to come first because you had to know how many goats you had in your flock. If your flock and your neighbor's flock got mixed together on the mountainside, how would you know how many goats belonged to you? You couldn't do that if you didn't have some way of counting. So we're going to get this projector to work here. Here we come. All right. So, we're going to talk today about Gutenberg's invention, and you'll find out why in 2000 they named him Man of the Millennium, too. So, the reason that we had to have writing in the first place, I think, and the math that went with it, is to communicate information across time and across distance. So, if you wanted to know at the end of the spring how many of your animals had survived the winter, you couldn't do that unless you had some way of writing down the number. If you wanted to make a deal with a guy over in the next town, the only way you could get the information from your village to his village was by having some way of communicating across distance. And that's, I think, the origin of writing. And it's symbolic. There are really, really old finds in various caves where they have beads on a stick that are supposed to be some kind of communication. There are other places where they found knots on a rope. They have not been able to interpret these yet. But they're pretty sure that it was a means of communicating. All right? One of the earliest writings that we have, the Mayas. Okay? And they had these little pictograms, and we don't really know what they mean yet. Someday they'll translate them. Right now they're just little pictures. In the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians started some form of writing. They would take a piece of wet clay and they would take a sharp stick and they would poke various designs and shapes into this, and we can read these things. The symbols represent what is being counted, and this is an account of grain products, bread, beer, butter, oil. This is from the 32nd century before the Common Era. That's a long time ago. All right. Here are the Egyptians. They had these wonderful pictograms, hieroglyphics they call them. At first they represented whole words, then they came to represent syllables, and then they evolved into representing consonants and words, because that's a simpler way of writing. If you ever get a chance to go to Egypt, if things quiet down a bit over there, one of the things they will try to sell you is your name in hieroglyphics, and you can wear it on a little gold thing around your neck. The tourists love these things. They pay a lot of money for them, but I don't think anybody from ancient Egypt would actually be able to read Stephen. I don't think it would mean anything to them. All right? In Asia, they had block printing. The thing with Asia is that it's vast. China is an enormous country. And China, by China, we're including not just what's modern-day China, but also Manchuria, parts of Korea, parts of Southeast Asia. It was a huge area, just enormous. And warlords managed to conquer vast areas of it. But when you've got control over a large area, how do you make sure that the people in this village do the same thing that the people in that village do? The only way to do that is to make sure that everybody gets the same message. Nowadays we use the expression, everybody's on the same page. Well, that's what the Chinese figured out that they had to do. They would take a piece of wood and they would carve into the wood the message that they wanted to transmit, and then they could use that block of wood to print, and everybody got the same thing. You can make a lot of copies, right? The only problem is you can't reuse it. You'd have to chop away 2014 and hack in 2015 and up the numbers and change everything around. It's a lot of work to carve all of these things. But it was invented in China, and they were able to use it for many, many years as a way of communicating. This is one of my heroes, Bishong. In 1040, he came up with the idea of movable type. And this is an example of what he invented to hold the various kinds of movable type. The only problem is that in order to write in Chinese, you need a minimum of 10,000 characters. Okay? And just one oops. And can you imagine how long it would take to pick them up and sort them again? Yeah. So it was a great idea. He made this type out of porcelain. The Chinese are famous for making porcelain. And it was a real success, except that it was a real pain. There were just too many characters, and it didn't work all that well. So the idea kind of went away. All right. In Western civilization, we had the Phoenicians, and their writing, they just had straight lines. Most of the time, they started out by writing on, they would write on an animal skin, because that was the thing that they had to write on. And they would use some, as an ink, they would use soot or anything dark colored that they could mix with a liquid and spread on the parchment. Eventually, they figured out a way of combining fibers to create what we call papyrus, and that evolved into what's paper nowadays. But ancient Phoenician, all consonants, there's no punctuation, but this is the ancestor of Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, Arabic, and therefore it's also an ancestor of the Roman type that we use today. It was written in right to left, and I always wondered how come it goes from right to left. Why do they do that? I think the answer has to do with the way you chisel things in stone. So you hold the chisel in your weak hand, and the strong arm that can really bang the chisel, right, the hammer, that goes in your right arm. If you try to do it this way, guess what you're going to wind up doing? You're going to hit yourself in the head. But if you hold it like this, you can work your way across, and I think that's how we got from right to left. But I couldn't swear to it because I wasn't really there. I'm old, but I'm not that old. There are other people who say that this is a result of right brain thinking. And that's why why the Phoenicians in particular went from right to left. The Greeks came up with an alphabet that's a lot simpler. It's all caps. There's no punctuation. The letters will look familiar to you. You can see them across the street on the frat houses, right? When the Romans came along, they had all caps, no punctuation. And here's an inscription from Rome. The language that most people spoke across the Roman Empire, believe it or not, was actually Greek. It took a long time for Latin to displace Greek. And Latin then got mixed with Frankish, which was the Frankish tribes, mostly to the Western Europe, the German tribes on the eastern side of the Rhine River, and the language that came out of that was what they call the lingua franca, the language of the Franks. It was mixed Latin with French and German all together. It evolved into the Romance languages, French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, the ones that we have today. And here you go into the early Middle Ages, and now we've got people writing in this style. It's called a Celtic lettering style. A lot of the writing at this point was being done by Irish monks. After the Roman Empire collapsed, the start of the Dark Ages in Europe, and the only people who really were literate and knew how to write these kinds of documents were the Celtic monks, and they wrote in this particular style of writing. It was they had 4 guidelines. They were 1 inch apart, and 1 inch in Latin is uncial, which gives the typeface its name. And the scribes invented the idea of lowercase. They wanted to indicate where you started a new sentence by putting a big letter, and that was where they came up with the idea of lowercase letters. So the Roman Empire is collapsing, the Irish scribes are flourishing, Europe falls into the Dark Ages, and writing, we have these semi-uncials. They're good. They save space, they conserve parchment, you can write on them. And one of the things that happened was that they would reuse the parchment. They would write something, and when you got the letter, you read the letter, and then you scrape off the ink, and you can write something else on top of it. And some of the most wonderful archaeological finds have been by people who've discovered hidden writing underneath a document, a much older document underneath. The oldest version that we have of the Gospels was a parchment that somebody decided to write something else on top of. But they managed to preserve a really, really old version of the Gospels that way. So between 430 and 700, the monks had a lot of time on their hands, and they illuminated the manuscripts. Has anybody here seen the Book of Kells? Anybody been to Dublin? Have you? Yeah. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's amazing. And they took the time to illustrate this. All the capital letters have fancy designs, and they drew pictures of themselves and their fellow monks. It's really something to see. So this is the Celtic style that they developed. You could read this, right? This is clear. The alphabet is the same as we have today. All right. In 789, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Charles the Great, otherwise known as Charlemagne, he was illiterate. He couldn't read. But he assembled, what he managed to do was pull together all of the wild tribes in Western and Central Europe and created the Holy Roman Empire. And he realized that he needed a way of communicating with them. So he brought these scribes together, and they created a standardized letter style. It's Carolingian writing. Carol is Latin for Charles. They used larger Roman letters, uncials of the Celts to introduce sentences, and then semi-uncials to complete them. So between 800 and 1000, this is the typeface that became black letter. And we'll talk about black letter in a couple of minutes. What happened was that it was really sprawled out, which wasted precious paper. So they started compressing it. And in order to compress it, rather than having these big wide curves, it got narrower and the curves became pointy. And you'll see the bodies are thicker and the strokes, the body of the letters is thinner, the strokes are thicker. So this is what you're seeing here. This is called black letter. And that's hard for us to read nowadays. You have to have, your eye has to get used to it. But now we're starting to see the late Middle Ages, you're seeing punctuation. There's the period. And you can tell that there's a new sentence starting there. All right? So around the 1400s, Gothic black letter was associated with Latin legal texts. And as printing started to come along, the Italian printers were looking for a more modern type for non-religious text. They wanted secular stuff to look secular, religious stuff to look religious, and they started copying the Roman typeface. They referred to that as the old time, the antiquity face. So you'll see it's called Antiqua, and one of the typefaces you'll find available to you is called Book Antiqua. And if you think it looks like Palatino, you're absolutely right. They are almost exactly the same. When Bill Gates wanted a typeface for Microsoft that looked good, it was a Roman typeface, he took Antiqua and they told him, well, you can't, it's patented. You can't just take it. Well, he was Bill Gates. So he invented Palatino, which is almost exactly the same. This Roman typing, this Roman style spread all throughout Western Europe, except in Germany, where they maintained that Gothic type. And that lasted right up until 1940, at which point the Nazis, for some bizarre reason, decided that it looked Jewish to them. And they outlawed it. Okay, it's history. What can I say? So this is what Mr. Gutenberg did. First, his brilliance had to do with the fact that he combined a whole bunch of different things that people had been using for a long time. And he mixed them together in a way that was really quite unique. He started out with the basic wine press. All right, if you take wine, or if you take grapes rather, or even olives, or anything that you want to press to get out the oil or the juice, what they had was a screw. And by turning the screw, you can increase or decrease the distance and press down. And the screw is, as if you know anything about the mechanical advantage, it's a great way of increasing the amount of force that you can place on things. And they had to have a lot of force because paper in those days was not flat. It was lumpy. So you had to press down really hard to make sure that the ink actually stuck to the paper. And that's why you needed to use a press. And that was the idea of the printing press. What he put in here, he had this little rack, and in here he would place a piece of paper, okay, and then that would be pressed against the type. And this is where the genius really comes out. Apparently, we don't know a lot about Johann Gutenberg, but it seems very likely that he had some friends who were jewelers. When jewelers make necklaces and they have different links or perhaps earrings, and they want to have a matched pair of earrings or buttons, all the same size and shape, they have a process for casting the metal so that every piece of metal that they cast is exactly the same. And that means that you have to have a reusable mold. And this is how Mr. Gutenberg solved the problem. This is the kind of mold that the jewelers used. First, you take a fairly hard piece of metal and you cut into it the shape of the letter. And it has to be backwards, of course. And then you put it inside the mold, and then you attach the second part of the mold over here. Okay? Now the beauty of the thing is this: it doesn't matter how big the letter is, you can adjust the mold to fit any size letter. And even though you can slide this part back and forth, look at this. The top and the bottom are always the same distance apart, which means all of the letters will sit right on the baseline. And when you pour molten lead in here, we'll just pretend I'm pouring molten lead in here, okay? And now we wait for it to cool, and then we take off, there were two springs that held this thing together, and it pops off, and here's an R. And it's backwards, and if I print this, it will print in the correct direction. Now the cool thing about this is that you can take all the letters that you've got that you want to print, and you can put them together. Let's see if I've got them right here. And you can put them into this frame. And you could put a piece of lead at the top and at the bottom. That's what we call the leading, right? And because they're all exactly the same size, when you press them down on the paper, they will all hit the paper with the same pressure. And you can use this again and again and again and again, and every copy will look exactly the same. And when you're done, guess what you can do? Take them apart and reuse the letters. So here's an example of type that was actually used. This is the letter A, and I'll pass that around. And the evolution of this thing, and this is amazing that it took so long for them to figure out how to do this, was to take these things and instead of using positives to make a set of negatives, and then pour more lead into those, and you could then create what they called a line of type. And this is from a linotype machine. And you can pass those around, you can see what a linotype looks like. And that's why this guy was such a genius, because this is what he invented. He invented this kind of printing. All right. So this is what it looks like. There's the jeweler's mold, right? And the body has to be the same. The depth has to be the same. But the width can be different. So the M can be wide, the W can be wide, and the I can be narrow, the L can be narrow, and that's what you're trying to do. This happened unbelievably fast. We're talking about the 1450s in Europe. There are no roads to speak of. What roads there are patrolled by bandits and bad guys. All right? And in the wintertime, they turn to ice and mud and slush, and in the summertime, they turn to dust. So communications is impossible, and yet, look at that. Between 1440, by 1469, it's going in Venice. They've moved across from Germany to Italy, and now they're printing in Venice. By 1500, there were 517 printing presses in Venice. They're going crazy over there. They're printing everything they possibly can. So when computers came in the 1980s, everybody said, oh, from now on, everything's going to be digital. It's all going to be electronic. No more printing. Guess what the first thing people did when they got a computer was? They printed something out. That was what they did. So that's where we are. Here you can watch it spread. We start over here. Where's Mr. Gutenberg? Right in this part of Europe, and then it spreads all the way all over Europe very, very quickly. As soon as these people, he licensed, the first ones he tried licensing, and after that they just stole his ideas. Poor guy. They didn't have good patenting laws in those days. It got from the German states to France, the lowlands, England, Spain. When Luther came along, all right, one of the things that Luther did for printing was he wanted his friends wanted him to get off because he was accused of heresy. And the only way they could do that was to try to persuade people that Luther was on the right track. But how do you get the word out to everybody of what Luther is trying to preach? Well, his friends paid to have Luther's theses printed. It gave a huge boost to the printing industry. And it was one of the things that the Lutheran faith became famous for, was printing stuff and distributing pamphlets and brochures. And the Counter-Reformation, launched by the Catholic Church, they picked up on that, and they also started printing stuff. So the religious wars between Protestants and Catholics also gave a boost to printing. All of this stuff went going. In England, the Tudors, as you know, probably know, were authoritarian, and they weren't happy at all with the idea of people just printing whatever they wanted. They kept a very, very tight grip on printing. There were licensed printing presses, official printing presses, and that was it. They didn't want anybody out there printing just about anything. And it took almost 100 years before anybody allowed a Bible to be printed in England. In Italy, they were printing so much stuff they actually ran out of material to print. It's a good story, and I'll tell it in a minute or two. This is William Caxton, first specimen of his printing to King Edward IV at Westminster. The king was impressed, but I don't think Edward IV was a big reader. Okay, so from 1450 we go to 1458. We have people designing new typefaces. So there's Jensen using old style. By 1477, Caxton is printing in English. Aldo Manutio. Aldus was printing by 1495. I'm going to talk more about him in just a moment. And by 1530, they were using foundries to produce fonts. The word font comes from foundry. That's the root of the word. So I'll tell you a little bit about this amazing guy. His name was Teobaldo Manutio. And he was an Italian, and he was well connected. He himself was not from a very important family, but he had friends. The Doge, that's the Duke of Venice, was his really good buddy and was willing to stake him to a lot of things. And Aldo came to him and he said, I got this idea for a printing press in Venice. And the Doge gave him the money, and he started printing stuff like crazy. Venice became a center of printing because it was a seaport. And it was a seaport at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. And when they ran out of stuff to print, Aldo and his boys went down to the docks, and they said to the sailors, you know, guys, when you go off to Egypt, when you go off to Syria, to Lebanon, to Turkey, to Greece, when you go to Egypt, when you go to all these other places and you come back to Venice, when you go there, look for these things. Okay? It's like with these little black marks on something, and we will pay you for as many of these as you bring back. And they did. And they brought back all of these documents, and Aldo printed them and distributed them. And what actually happened was that during the Middle Ages, most of the Roman and Greek literature had been lost. But the Arabs had copied it, many times translated into Arabic, and it was saved in Egypt, it was saved in Syria, it was saved in these places. And when the sailors brought it back to Venice, Aldo translated it back from Arabic, from Hebrew, from Aramaic, from whatever language it was in, into first Latin, but then he looked at, my audience doesn't speak Latin, my audience speaks Italian. And he started printing in the vernacular. The other thing that you should know, you see the stand here that I've got the computer on. If you went into a medieval home and they had a book, if they were lucky enough to have a book, it was humongous. And it would sit on a stand like that. I believe that, has anybody here been to the Villa Louis? Out on the, okay, if you go into the Villa Louis, they don't have a big library of books there, but they've got some big books and they're on book stands like this. Because that was the way books were in those days. A book was a really big deal, and they were really big physically as well. So they would sit on a book stand. Well, Aldo realized that the roads were starting to open up, people were traveling around, and he could make a smaller version of a book that you could carry with you. He invented the paperback. Oh, it gets even better. He loved the typefaces, this stuff, it was really nice. But he realized that there were some things that were more important than others. And Aldo decided that he would commission a typeface that sort of leaned over a little bit. Looked a little bit more like handwriting, and he invented italics. And that's what he did as well. He was an amazing guy. When they started the company, the first company that did this document design software was called Aldus. And the first program that they wrote was called Aldus PageMaker. And it was named after Aldo Menuccio, a really wonderful guy. Here's another great guy. This is Claude Garamond. He was French. He lived after Aldo. But he was the one who came up with the idea of the apostrophe. He put the accent marks in French, and he put the cedilla under the C. So, and there's also a typeface called Garamond. And you asked me last time about my favorite typefaces. Garamond isn't real high on my list, but my students absolutely adore Garamond. It seems to be everybody's favorite typeface. What can I say? If you like it, you know what I don't like about it? I don't like the italics. I don't like the way they look. You'll try it. We'll see. Okay? So that's all I need to talk to you about in terms of the printing press and how we got here. The next thing we need to do is to take a look at choosing type and using type. Okay? So let's take a look at choosing type and document design. We're going to talk about the different kinds of text, picking body face, typefaces you should avoid, and then how you pair these things to make sense. So, various kinds of text. Let's take a look. All right. Most documents will have at least two. Heads and subheads, and then body text. Within body text, you may have typefaces for lists and captions and tables and other graphics. You may simply decide that these things you'll do in bold, or you'll do them in italics, or you'll do them some other way. It doesn't have to be a big assortment of typefaces. You get a little bit blown away by the number of typefaces available with Word and with InDesign. You scroll down that list and it's just enormous. It seems to go on forever. So picking a typeface can be a real chore, but we'll look at some examples and we'll talk about how you can go around picking these things. So most of the text in the document is going to be the body text. The other kind of text is display text. It's a lot fancier. You certainly wouldn't want to read a whole book in something like this. But it'll work fine for a logo. It works fine for small amounts of text. That's what display text does for you. Body text is what you use for paragraphs. It's what you use for lists. Usually body text is 14-point or smaller. 14-point is actually pretty big. I don't think you would, unless you're writing a children's book, you probably would never use type that large. Americans prefer Roman type. And when I say Roman type, I'm talking about letters that stand straight up, just like this. Think of a Roman centurion on duty, right? Straight and tall like this. Now, Roman centurion, he's Italian, right? And when he's off duty, he relaxes. It's italics. See the difference? Okay. So we talk about Roman and we talk about italics. All right. Americans prefer Roman typefaces with serifs, with these little ears on them for body text. Other parts of the world, they don't care. And in fact, many parts of the world, they like sans serif for everything. Sans serif is French for without serifs. Hyphenation and kerning, usually you turn those on. There are some times when you shouldn't. We'll talk about that as well. So what are we trying to do? First, the typeface has to be legible. And this becomes an alignment problem. You want to make sure that the text is easy to read as you go down the column, right? The blocks of text need to be well organized. You can't have one block of text starting here and another one over here, another one over there. It's got to make sense. You don't want to scare the reader. You want the reader to be able to look at the text and work through it. So being consistent, you know, if everything you do is in, what have I got here, Arno, it's going to be fine. Everything looks like it belongs in the same document. If some is in Arno and some is in Garamond and some is in Georgia, it's not going to look good. All right. So, legibility. The line length has to fit the type. So I'll show you some examples here of typefaces, and you'll see the differences as I bring them up on the screen. Here's Arno. Zoom in a little bit. Okay, so here's Arno. And this has a relatively low X height. All right. And you can see the line length. And this first line here goes to where there is. So the last word here is where there is. Here's Bookman. And Bookman, as you can see, is much, much bigger. Look what happens to the first line of Bookman. It only gets as far as the word cosmos because of the size of the type. So the size of the type is going to make a difference in how long the line length is going to be. Generally speaking, the larger the type, the longer the line length can be. The smaller the type, the narrower the column, the better it's going to look. Okay, I'll show you some more examples. I promise you we'll get back to this. Okay. So the other thing you can do, you can change the leading. This is times, 10 point times, 10 on 10. This is what we refer to as set solid. So there's no extra leading between the lines of type. It's readable, but it is kind of scrunched together, and you're going to get eye strain after a while if you have to read something like that. The line length here is a 7.5-inch line. Here's Bookman. Okay, I changed it from times to Bookman, and now it's Bookman 10 on 13. Extra 3 points of leading between each line of type, and the line length is a lot shorter. Which one do you think is easier to read? The Bookman, isn't it? Yeah, it makes a difference. And you can see that. You can see the difference right there. Unity works really well. Here's Georgia, 10 on 14. So I put 4 extra points of lead between each line of type. Makes it very, very readable. The paragraphs are indented, and I turned on hyphenation. So even though it's flush left, ragged right, it's not terribly ragged. It's not real big dips and valleys over here, hills and valleys. It's fairly even. And it's easier to read. So adding the extra leading is going to make the type a lot more legible. What you're trying to do is you want everything to work together. Proximity. Here's a head. It goes with this body text, right? Here's a head. It goes with this. Here's a head. It goes with this. Here's a head. It goes with this. These things need to work together. That's proximity. And repetition. The heads are all the same typeface. Sans serif, bold, all the same size. That also makes it easier to figure out what they are and where they are. That's what we're going for here. That's what we're trying to do. All right. Things you should stay away from. All right. Your mom probably gave you a whole list before you came to college, right? Okay. I bet you didn't talk about typefaces, though. Let's take a look at some of the typefaces that you really need to avoid. All right. First, typewriter faces. This is where all the letters are equal width, And the reason for that is that on the old typewriter, every time you hit a key, the carriage moved exactly the same distance. If it was a 10-point typewriter, it would move 1/10 of an inch for each character. And it didn't matter if it was a big W or a little itty-bitty I, it moved the same width. All right? If you want something to look old-fashioned, if you want it to look typewritten, this is the way to do it. Nowadays, it's always considered a display font. Here are some examples of typewriter styles that you'll see available to you. Here's a whole paragraph written in typewriter style. This is what my papers looked like when I was in college. I wrote on a typewriter. That was what I had. Okay. If you want to give the impression that it's a manuscript, a screenplay, a personal letter, that's fine. But as an engineer, you probably don't want people to think of you as old-fashioned. So stay away from this, from your resume, your cover letter. Doesn't belong. Not helpful here. Okay. Lisa, you need to go wash your face? No, go ahead, kid. Go on. Wash up. You'll feel better. All right. Foreign language fonts. They're not designed for English. Yes, I know that they have alphabets in them. And I know you can type in them, but they were not designed for English. They were designed for foreign languages. If you come across a typeface and you don't know the name, if it doesn't ring a bell, if it doesn't sound like something English or American, look it up. You have Wikipedia. You know how to do this, right? All right, do a little Google for Satu, and you'll discover it's a noun. It comes from India. And it's a holy man. And it's Sanskrit. Is this an English typeface? No, it is not. All right? If you type with one of these things, this is what it's going to look like. This is from a typeface called Mingli, which is designed for writing in Ming, which is Chinese. All right? Yes, you can write in English, but it doesn't look very good. So when you pull down the menu, you're going to see all of this stuff, and unless you actually can read it, I think Katie knows how to read it, but the rest of you don't use it if you don't recognize the name. All right? You can try translating it as well. This is what happens. You can turn on foreign language typing on your computer. There's a way to do that, and if you want me to show you, I'll show you how to do it. I took a paragraph in English, and I used Google Translate to translate it into sort of Chinese. Not even close. No, not even a little bit. Is it gobbledygook? Nonsense. All right, see? So don't trust Google Translate to translate it to Chinese. But again, if you see stuff like this, what typeface do you think Osaka is for? Japanese. Good. Okay. All right. So you got it all figured out. All right. Some of these typefaces come with the various programs, applications. This is what came with Office 2007, the Vista version. So you can see they had a whole bunch of C fonts. That's where Calibri came from. These others, Cambria is it's okay. It's not very pretty, I don't think. Candara I never use. I have no use for it. It doesn't look very good. Consolis is a typewriter font. Why would I use that? Constantia is okay. Constantia, the thing here is that he's kind of trying to get you to think of Constantine, the Roman Empire, so you'll think it's a real Roman typeface, but it's not really. All right. Corbel, I have no idea what that was for. Here's Niala. This is kind of a cool little face for informal writing. It's very informal looking typeface. Seago, do you know Seago Road here in Madison? Yeah, the designer lived in an apartment on Seago Road. And when he designed the typeface, he decided that he was going to call it Seago, and Microsoft went for it. So we have Seago, we have Seago Print, we have Seago Script, and it was all invented by some fellow who lived over here on Seago Road in Madison. So there you go. You should know, as I talk about these typefaces, there are type designers who have their little groupies and people who just adore them and think they're so wonderful. I think it's like a lot of things in this world. People get a little bit carried away with this stuff. But we'll talk about some of these guys. Some of them are very interesting. This is what came with Office 2010. And you can see it's a whole mishmash of different typefaces, different type styles. Some of them are obviously display. This is for display. You would never set a whole book in these. Others aren't too bad. Californian is not bad looking. Hightower isn't bad looking. Here's Garamond. This is the Microsoft version of Garamond. Adobe has its own version of Garamond as well. And there are a whole bunch of others here. I don't know if these are still available to you through the CAE. Every time the CAE revamps its computer system, they do stuff. You gain fonts, you lose fonts. Heidenschweiler was around for ages and ages and ages. The last time I looked, I couldn't find it on the CAE computers. But I don't know. Honestly, don't know what happened to it. All right. For the in the Mac version in OS X in 2011, they added a whole bunch of fonts in Lion. So if you see one that's called Lao, that's for Laotian, right? Khmer, Cambodian, right? Hebrew, Indian. They added a lot of foreign fonts here as well. Some of these will work in English. Many of them are designed to be used for foreign. Do you all know what Stix is? I'll bet you never heard of Stix. You're going to learn so much stuff in this class. All right, this is what it is. Stix is the Scientific and Technical Information Exchange. And this is a bunch of people who got together and decided that scientists and engineers needed their own typeface. There weren't enough. So you will find the Stix, and you can see them. They came with the OS X. There's Stix General, Integrals, I don't know, Stix 2-sim, 3-sim, 1-sim. I have no idea what these things are. I've never used them. You can fool around with them, try them out if you want. If you're a real engineer, you can boast that you use Stix, because that's what real scientists use. I don't know. All right, other stuff to avoid. Symbols, ornaments, dingbat fonts. Please do not submit a paper written in music. Okay? I can play it, but that doesn't mean I'll know what you're trying to tell me. This one is Morse code. This is Zapf dingbats. Herman Zapf, I think he's still alive. He's probably close to 100 now, but he's still around. He's one of these designers who's designed just about everything. You'll see Zapf mentioned everywhere. You'll see Herb Lublin. He's the one who invented Lucida, a whole bunch of others. Other ones to use with caution, anything that's a script or display typeface. There are also things that are called grunge fonts, which they deliberately make them look like it's broken type, it's dirty, it's smeared ink. That's supposed to be cool. And you'll see the advertising, they use this a lot in advertising. So here's an example. These are some examples of typefaces that you probably would never use. Look at how ornate this thing is with all these extra little swash lines and ornaments. All right, so now the question is, how do you pair these things together? How do you match a head to body text? Professor Zwickler, you said we should have one of each, and that's a good idea. And this is why, because you can see here that I've got a head. That's good old Algerian. And then this is called a run-in head. It's a head, and it doesn't sit on a separate line. It's actually in the paragraph. The way you can tell it's a head is because it's sans serif, and it's bold, and it's red, and it's slightly larger, and it screams, "Look at me, I'm a head." So there you can see that this part is going to be the history. Here's another kind of a head, again set in a sans serif typeface, and you'll notice that we always try to make sure that the head is close to the text with which it belongs. That's a real key rule. Proximity makes a huge difference. One of the problems you're going to have with your resume is that it's really hard to get good proximity on a resume. You got this real estate that you try to manage, and getting the things to fit that belong together to fit together can be very tricky. Go for contrast. If you use a wide typeface for heads, use a narrow typeface for body text. If you use a bold typeface for heads, use a delicate typeface for body text. Decorative with plain, try to find some contrast there. So general rules, heads you'll do better if you use sans serif. Americans like that better. And then body text can be serif, and that'll be fine. Try to avoid similar classifications. Don't hand in something that says, "Oh, look, I use different fonts. I've got both Arno and Bell." They're not different enough. They're too similar. It looked like a mistake. If you don't make them dissimilar enough, it looks like a mistake. Try to keep it simple. Don't use all the typefaces that are available to you. So just a couple of examples before we go into the resume writing. Here's a head. I did the head in Bell Gothic, and the body text is Candara. And on the right, the head is in Bell Gothic, and the body is in Dido. And you can see that Dido is very delicate, very small, and you don't have to have any extra line spacing because the letters are very small. So you can get more text in there. This one is kind of clunky looking to me, to my eye. All right? The head here is in Colonna, and the body is in Constancia. And on the right, the head is in Colonna, and the body is in Baskerville. Look at the difference in the size of the characters. This one ends almost 2 lines before this one, because this is a much smaller typeface. All right? I'll just go through a couple more examples, and then we'll move along. All right, this is too much. All right, a huge headline like that, wide Latin 32, set on Bell, italic. It jars. They don't work terribly well together. All right, very simple. On the left here, we've got the author's name in 20th century, all caps. Then comes the head in Rockwell, extra bold. The subhead is in 20th century, and the body is in Palatino. It's probably too much. Rockwell, by the way, was actually commissioned by the Rockwell Corporation. They paid a lot of money for a font that looks exactly like another one that I can't remember off the top of my head. This one, the head is 20th century, and the body is Georgia. 20th century is kind of cool because it's narrower. You can get a lot of text in. And that is the end of that. So now we're going to talk about resume. Whoops, that's not the one I wanted. I can't find it. Where did it go? Excuse me for a moment while I put my glasses on. I thought I dropped it in here. And I don't know where it went.
It's possible that it lost its file extension.
Oh, that's possible.
If you maybe like right click and rename it, just add .pptx, it might be able to detect it. Or it might open with PowerPoint.
But there were several here. Hold on a second. I'm going to have to go back. No, I'll have to check all the visuals. Give me a sec here. I just did this. Not 10 minutes ago. Not from 2011. What in the world could have happened to it? I do not see it here. It's not in visuals. Maybe it's in the class one. We'll try one more time. But that's not the one that I did today. I just worked on this. What in the world? When you move things around, how in the how in the world did I manage to lose this thing? This one is from 2011. I think that's too old. I don't think that's the one that I want. I'm pretty sure it's not the one that I want. Okay. Maybe it's somewhere else on the disk here?
Did you have it open on this computer?
No, I didn't have it open on this computer.
There was something back there called writing resumes.
Yeah, where'd you see that?
One level back. If you, I think you hit the back arrow. It should be on the bottom.
I hope this is the one that I want. Yeah, this will do it. All right. Okay. I apologize for the delay. Computers don't always do exactly what you think they're going to do or should do. All right. So what we're doing here is we're going to talk about this particular document. For most of you, it's going to be one page. The rule, and I don't know if it's a rule or not, but this is what they tell you, is that you have you get one page for every 10 years that you've been in the workforce. And one of the reasons why I really like the LinkedIn page is because you can make that as long as you want. You can put anything you want on there, and there's no limit. Whereas for this thing, when you go down to the career fair, if you hand them a bundle of paper, they're not going to look at it. They're only going to look at one page. So you have to be concise. Think of it as a snapshot. It tells the employer who you are, what you've done, what you know, and the focus nowadays is on skills. That's what they're looking for, skill sets. And the reason for that is because they don't want to train you. So they want to know what kinds of skills you have so that they can decide whether or not you'll fit. It's a map. It tells them where you've been, and it also can tell them where to go in an interview. I learned this from a student a few years ago, and I was surprised. This is what the fellow told me. He had just come up from the career fair downstairs, and he said, "Oh, Professor Zwickel, you're not going to believe what happened. I got a chance to interview with one of these people at the career fair. I met them yesterday. We set up an interview for today, and I went in there, and all he had in front of him was my resume. And all he could talk about was what was on my resume. The resume determined where the interview went. You have control. If you want to talk about something, make sure it pops out of your resume, and then it will come up in the discussion. All right, now you need to know that when you actually go in for a formal interview, because of fair employment hiring laws, they have to ask everybody the same questions. They have to give all the candidates the same amount of time. Doesn't mean that your answer has to answer the question specifically. If you want to add more information, yes, absolutely do that. But when you approach them, when you were standing in your little line, waiting to talk to somebody at the career fair, I've seen you out there with your resumes and perspiration pouring off your, and you got that smile. So when you're ready to do that, here's your resume. You hand it to them. They put it on their little clipboard, and they're looking at it, and stuff pops out. And they don't have to stick with the regular questions. They can ask you anything they want because you just handed them a resume. So if you stress stuff, if you learn how to use emphasis on your resume, you can control the interview. How about that? That's power. All right? Now, the modern day resume, it's all different kinds. There are resumes on paper. There are resumes where they'll take the paper ones back to the shop and they will scan them. And they have something called OCR, optical character recognition. And don't think the computers are smart enough to know who you really are. What the computers are clever at figuring out is strings of letters. They are trained to recognize strings of characters. So if you are an electrical engineer, they will look for every instance of ELECT, and they will note that that's in the resume. That's how they can spot things, by strings of letters. They're not smart. I've had students who experimented by sending out resumes where they tried different combinations of words to see what would happen. Trying to outthink these guys is pretty tricky. But if you read the ad for the job, they'll put the keywords in the ad. They'll tell you what we're looking for. Drop those keywords into your resume, and there they are. The scanner will find them. That's what they're looking for. The word processing programs, you will see with Word and with InDesign, you can get templates for resumes, and you'll look like a clone. You look like everybody else. ECS used to have its own clone. I don't know if do they still have their own resume template that they give you at ECS? Yeah. So you're going to look just like everybody else. So how do you stand out in a crowd if everybody else looks the same? If you look like everybody else, you'll have to be clever. You'll have to figure out ways of looking different, but not too different. Generally speaking, you want to stay away from fancy designs or fancy fonts because the stupid OCR thing can't read them. And that's the end of the line for you if you do that. Bells and whistles, videotapes, CDs, I would probably tell you to stay away from those as well. They're not appropriate for this kind of a job hunt. If you were going for a job, part of the job was making video, absolutely, right? That might be really important. If you're going for a design job, if you consider yourself a designer, you want to send them copies of your designs. And you may do that electronically, or you might put it on a disk. Whatever works, right? Be unique, but don't look too different, because they don't know how to handle that stuff. All right, Word makes it so simple for you. You go into Word, and you can just pull up a whole bunch of resumes. This is on a Macintosh. It's slightly different on these Windows computers. But in this case, you just pull down under here the category resumes, and you got a whole bunch of templates. And the nice thing is that you don't have to even turn your brain on, because the computer will fill the stuff in for you. All right? And you can see the various resume templates just waiting for you, just sitting there for you. And this is what it looks like. I didn't fill any of this stuff in. If you look at it, you'll see that it's nonsense language, right? But the computer already filled in my name and my office address and my phone number, because it took all of that stuff out of my Word account. When you open up Word and you start using it, Word remembers these things about you. And you can see it's got my objective, my experience, my lorem ipsum dolor. That was a tough job that I had one time. Cleaning up all those lora ipsums. Okay. And then my education, my skills. And, you know, this is what Bill Gates likes. He's got the heads in Baskerville 13 and the body in Baskerville 10. And that's what you get. With the resumes, you get somebody else's idea of what looks good. This one is called the grayscale resume template. And I'm not sure why they do that, because maybe it's because they have these bars here that are gray, different shades of gray. But again, the heads are Century Gothic Bold 12, and the body is Century Gothic 10. Another one from Bert. This is called initials. And YN, apparently my initials are now YN, your name. Okay. Century Gothic Bold 12, Century Gothic 10. So what I know now is that anytime I see a resume and it's done in Century Gothic, it's a Microsoft template. This is what InDesign will give you. Here's a resume template from InDesign. Same idea, right? They all look very similar. Same sort of thing. Here's another one. Here the guy's name is lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum. What does the E stand for? I don't know. All right, so some things to think about. First, proximity. Related items should be close together. Okay? So, courses that you've taken that matter, that should all be in one place. Honors that you've received, awards that you've received, that should all be in one place. On the lines where you have work experience, the job title, who you worked for, when you worked there, that stuff belongs together, right? All of that goes together. The defaults in Word are particularly annoying because the bullets are way too far apart. They're not where they really ought to be to get a good-looking bullet list. Pull out my handy pen here. If you try to do this stuff in Word, it's going to give you a bullet, and then it'll say something, blah, blah, blah. The distance here is almost ½ an inch. And proximity tells you that's too much. The bullet and the text that it belongs to, they should be fairly close together. Not crashing into each other, but close enough so that you can see that this bullet goes with this text. So I would urge you to reset the bullets if you use one of these templates. Alignment, some people complain that there are too many different margins on some of these resumes. They'll have, okay, so the education, the university you went to, and then your major, right, and then your courses, and then, I don't know, publications. And so what we're winding up with here is we've got all these different margins. And there's some people who say that you shouldn't overdo it with too many margins. There's something to be said for limiting it, not having more than 2 or 3 margins, not having an endless set of indents. Try to show the relevance of the items, so it's more than just a bullet list. It's great that you went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. What did you do there? What did you learn there? That's what they really want to know. And then contrast. The stuff that's important needs to be emphasized. And these clones, these templates really don't do that. They do a rather poor job of it. So the conventional format has a heading and then an objective. And we'll go through these things. And as a general rule, for each of these items, you go backwards in time. So the first thing under education is the most recent school you're in, then the previous school, and the previous school, and the previous school. And the same for jobs. Most recent job, working your way backwards in time. That's the way they do it. So the heading, your name and contact info, really important. You need a reliable phone number. If you tend to lose your phone, this is not a good sign. Okay? You need to have a phone number where you can be reached because you want the interview. The only purpose for doing this resume thing is to get an interview, right? That's what. If you send out 10,000 resumes and you hear nothing back, you have killed trees for no good reason. So the purpose of this document is to persuade somebody to call you up and ask you to come in for an interview. So the numbers at the top need to be good and reliable. Your email address at the university is good until, I believe, 6 months after you graduate. And then it goes away. You can switch, as a UW alum, you can switch to a UW alumni account if you want. I think Google is very reliable. I use Gmail for my personal email. You can use whatever you like. Just make sure that you check it, or if you don't check it, make sure that you forward it to another account that you do check. That's a really important thing to do as well. Indicate how long the numbers are going to be good. You folks move every May. You're out of there, right? So if this phone number, if this address is good until May 15th, 2016, you need to say that somewhere. And then you need to give them a number to reach you after May 15th, right? Make sure that they know how they can get hold of you. Website, well, there's a debate about whether or not you should put a website up there. And this is the argument. If it's your own business, yes, that shows you have entrepreneurial spirit. It shows you have management skills. It shows that you know about money. That's good, right? But if it's just a website where you've got, oh, my friends and I getting drunk at a party last week, not helpful. Not helpful. Photos don't belong on resumes. The reason why they don't want photos on resumes is because they don't want to get sued. What can happen, and what used to happen all the time, is that they would go through a stack of resumes and they would pull out the ones that they wanted to interview, and they were all white guys from Milwaukee named Mike. And all the women and the minority group members wound up in the reject pile. And they don't want to be in that situation. They don't want to be able to identify your race, your sex, your religion, or anything like that, because that's just going to create problems. And that's why they don't really want your photo on there. I do think it might be a good idea to put your LinkedIn page. If you work on your LinkedIn profile, I think that's a good thing to do, and I would certainly put a link to it there. All right, so here's a header, different kinds of contacts. Here's J. Patrick Stewart, student, and he's got his phone number up there. Here's his street address, and it's good until this date. And you write everything out. Don't assume that they know that WI is Wisconsin. I have had people who saw the WI and asked me how I liked living in the Rockies. It's Wyoming, isn't it? And I said, no, it's the West Indies. What's wrong with you? Okay, you have to write everything out. And if you're applying abroad, after the zip code, you have to put in USA. And then for the phone number, if you're applying abroad, you need to put in the +1 for the US. Okay, so here's your UW email, and then after June 1st, new address, right? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. All right, here's the story with the objective. What did they tell you about the objective? You should have one, shouldn't have one? Good idea, bad idea? All right, I'll give it, this is the argument. This is what people say. Yes, you should have an objective at the top of your resume because it makes you look focused and mature. You're a mechanical engineer, but your real interest is in designing automobile transmissions. You should definitely say that your objective is to work in the field of automobile transmissions. The mechanical engineering degree is a very general degree. And this makes you look focused. It makes it look like you really know what you want. That looks mature. That looks good. It saves time by limiting the possibilities. As they go through the resumes, they'll look for people who are interested in working on transmissions. They'll see transmissions on yours, and you'll go into the let's talk to them pile. So that could be a good thing as well. And it offsets that generalist thing. So instead of just being a civil engineer, you're a civil engineer who's interested in some kind of structural thingy that you know how to do. So those are the arguments for putting an objective at the top. Here are the arguments on the other side, why you shouldn't do it. It could limit the jobs for which you'd be considered. Let's say, yes, you like transmissions, but you're also interested in powertrains and exhaust systems and computer controls and smart cars and all this electric cars, right? If you just put down transmissions there, you aced yourself out of a job. As your resume starts to fill up, the objective becomes a waste of space. And that's because in many cases these things are so general that they don't tell them anything about you. I am desperately seeking a job in the automotive industry before my mom kicks me out of the house. That would be truer than a lot of the things that you'll see people put on there. You'll have to decide if it's worth it to have it there or not. But you should know that it's not a required thing, and in some cases it might not make sense. The best thing you guys have going for you right now is education. This is numero uno. You're going to one of the best schools in the whole country, if not the whole world. You need to play that up a lot. That makes a good impression on people. Relevant courses. Now, ECS has been telling people it's not the courses, it's the projects you worked on that really matters. And I think you should consider that. Don't list courses by number. Telling them I took EPD 397 means nothing to them. Telling them that you took technical communication, writing, and speaking for the workplace, that tells them something. So write it out. We were limited in course titles to 40 characters. That's what the timetable people did to us. So the course title, this course, Elements of Computer-Aided Design. What the heck does that tell you? Nothing. So I call it document design. And you can call it whatever you want, but as long as they can understand what the course is and they can find it when they look at the transcript, they'll be able to find it on the transcript as well. So ambiguous titles need explanation. Don't use numbers. And again, ECS says talk about projects. Honors and awards, if you've gotten them, play them up. They're important. They count. Your GPA, okay, look, folks, they know that you did the things that every dumb freshman does. And they know that you've been working to fix that for the past 3 years. Yeah, they know all this stuff. They know all this stuff. So give them the GPA, be honest about it, and then you bring it up in the interview. You talk about how you learned the importance of managing your time and not staying up all night with your buddies. You learned the importance of meeting deadlines. You learned how to prioritize, and it took you a while. And that's why your first semester grades look the way they do. They know. They've been there. They're not newbies here. Should you round it off? I had a student one time who said, well, yeah, it's okay to round it off. He said, my GPA is something like, I said, that's a bit much. He said, yeah, round it off. I said, yeah, well, go ahead and round it off. He said, all right. Okay, you know what you can get away with, folks. Keep it honest. All right. This is what the kind of thing you'll see on the templates. And we talked about this. We talked about emphasizing the wrong thing. So the templates will have the word education. What have I got? Bigger, bolder, red, right? Italicized, underlined, with a bullet and a colon. And I don't know if you can you see the shadow effect? Yeah. See? So what's the most important word there? Education. What's really important is this. I got a Bachelor of Science at the UW-Madison. That's what you want to play up. So I took this and I changed it. I made it gray. Yeah, it's all caps. All right. It's there. This is a list of education, but this is the stuff that's really important. So as you go through your resume, take a look and see if you're emphasizing the right thing. Work experience. You need to tell them what you did. Okay? The job title and responsibilities. The responsibilities are probably more important than the job title, unless you're a senior vice president of international sales. Okay? Which, by the way, is the newest thing to do to you people is to hire you for jobs and then give you wildly imaginative job titles and less money. Yeah. So you could be senior international vice president, international vice president in charge of marketing. Your main job is making sure the boss's coffee cup is filled in the morning. All right. Machines that you used. This is something that you need to do as you go through your careers. Write down the names of the machines that you work on so you can remember what you did and how you learned to work on these things. Because sure as shooting, you're going to come up in some interview situation where they're going to say, well, we have a Velcro 487. Oh, Velcro. Yeah, I used to use one of them in school when I was younger. I probably take me a while to get back up to speed, but yeah, I know how to do that. That's going to make an impression on them if you understand what these things are. Any reports you wrote, any training that you ran. Sometimes you guys get hired for these internships and co-ops. You learn how to do something, and then you have to train the incoming crop of interns and co-ops. That's a good thing. Tell them that you did that. The name of the company, the location. Some companies have, nowadays it's even worse, they have these ambiguous names. What are these things? My wife and I were following a truck down the highway the other day, and the truck said Tauntaun on it. I said, what the heck is Tauntaun? My wife knew. Yeah, guess how I felt. Yeah, Mr. Sophisticated Technology Engineering College professor. All right, so she explained to me what Tauntaun is. But you find these startups called all kinds of things, Dog Breath Inc. So this is what you do. Next to the name of the company, in parens, tell them what they are. Tell them what they were. It doesn't have to be very detailed. It can be very simple. I used to work for a company called VGC. All right? And nobody knows what that is. So in parentheses next to VGC, printing supplies. Oh, is that what you did? When and how long did you do it? You go most recent first, work your way back in time. The dates, it's okay to round off. You don't need to say that I started working for Johnson & Johnson on May 23rd at 8:15 a.m. It was a Monday. They don't need that. Okay? You can simply say summer of 2015. That's plenty. They know what that means. Part-time jobs that help pay tuition. That's a good thing to put in there, but you know, just being a cashier, I wouldn't give that 5 lines on my resume. It simply shows that you have a work ethic and you can manage your time. All right? And any promotions or awards that you got, put them in there. Other stuff, transferable skills. This stuff is really important, and you need to play this up in every time it comes up in one of the jobs that you've had or experiences that you've had. Any place where you had to use communication skills. You wrote something, you did a presentation, you designed a website, you prepared a manual, anything related to communication should go in there. Team skills, leadership skills, this is important stuff. Competencies, this is the skill set, right? the machines you know how to use, any computer applications. By the end of the semester, you should be able to say that you're competent at Adobe CC, InDesign, and Photoshop. We're not going to do enough with Illustrator so that you can really claim competence with it. You can claim familiarity, I'll give you that, but not competence. All right, and then languages, computer languages, non-English languages. You can say you have a reading knowledge of it, or you can say you're fluent in it. The highest level of this is bilingual. And if you're really bilingual, you could say, I am bilingual, Spanish and English. All right, but you better be sure you really are bilingual. How much time have I got? Very little time. Outside interests, they're looking for people who are going to do more than just sit there. They really want you to do more than just engineering. They want you to talk to people. They want you people who get along with people. Many of them have a community service mission. So other stuff that you did that shows that you got out there, you volunteered, you did something, that looks really, really good. And that's why you all need to join this organization. It's the Wisconsin Engineer Magazine. Why weren't you there last night? You should have been there. This is a great thing to be able to put on your resume. Alyssa's resume is going to sparkle. Katie's is going to glow gently. Okay? But it makes you, and last comment I'll make is, don't put down stuff that makes you look like a loner. I've seen great resumes, and at the end it said hobbies or activities, and it said bike riding, reading, playing guitar, watching old movies. Do you ever talk to other people? Do you even know how to talk to other people? So try to avoid sounding like a loner. Okay? Put in some kind of group activity, some kind of team sport, something. Even backgammon and tiddlywinks or something will work. Questions, problems, anything I need to know? Okay? Homework's coming back to you next week. Questions and problems, let me know. I'll see you then.